This is a unique privilege, and I am not a TED Talk person. My speeches are long, dry, not much fun, and so I just warn you that ahead of time, but I will keep it within the time limit. The concept of business, integrity, and zest clearly are important to successful management and to people who are in business who want to be successful. Actually, at the moment, I think business is a lot easier than homemaking. My wife is home. She's not at home yet. She's in extended care with a broken hip. I've been doing housework. That is not fun. Laundry, dishes, sweeping, watering plants, things around the house and in the yard. That's real work. So I'm going to tell you about some career opportunities that really, if you get married and want to be a homemaker, don't take what I say seriously. That's more important. John has 8 brothers and sisters. There are 9 of them, and they're all outstanding people. And that is a major job to be the mom. But excluding homemaker, I've worked in many fields, including healthcare, management, retail services, investing, ranching, among other things. And we had a ranch in Texas. And I will share some of the lessons learned from each of these experiences. I've also had some mentors along the way. And I'm going to encourage you to select a mentor that has these biz qualities, because you can learn from people that have been out there doing things that you want to emulate and you consider to be valuable. But some of my mentors, my most important ones, have been teachers. So use those opportunities while you're here to talk to your teachers, ask them. I know they're busy. I know they've got to grade papers, but they also are very good at counseling. So ask them for help. And I can't resist telling this story about a man who emulates these biz qualities in a brief presentation. He is a person I admire because of the qualities. And I want to tell you the results of his company that he started. It recently sold for $850 million. Now, I understand what you're saying about not making money, but he gives his money away. He uses his money properly, and I think that's the difference. $800 million from a startup company that started about 20 years ago. He's the one that ought to be making the talk. Maybe next time, John. Dan's father was a Nashville radiologist, deceased now, and Dan wanted to help him to generate greater efficiency, greater revenue collection in his office. He was a radiology practitioner in town. And so Dan was the first provider in Tennessee to connect directly with Blue Cross Blue Shield through automated billing. But Dan didn't stop there. He also noticed that when patients came into his dad's place, they had to call Blue Cross or whatever the Aetna or whoever the insurance company was and wait on the line for 30 minutes or so to get the eligibility. So that was a very inefficient thing for his office, and he said, the internet ought to be used in healthcare too. It's being used in other places. Why isn't it being used here? Because this all could be automated. You could have in a doctor's office or in the hospital admitting office. You could have one monitor. You could go in and pick the insurance company, put the name in, and you've got the eligibility right off the bat. So it was a great idea. And Dan, being a smart engineer, that's his background, decided to get an MBA. And I encourage you to get an MBA. He got his at Owen because there are things you can learn. He learned how to do a good business plan. He learned a lot of other things besides that. But I was an investor in the company. I was chairman of it, but it was valued initially at $750,000. And Dan was off to the races. He raised it, but it took a lot of money. He had to raise a lot more money. So he had the humility and the integrity to select someone to be CEO who could help raise that money. So he picked Jim Lackey, and you may hear about him if you're in the Nashville business community. And Jim Lackey was successful in helping raise the money. And so that this purchase I told you about, I don't know what that is, Experion is the name of the company. It's a data and analytical tools manager, and they bought it for $850 million. But you don't see any swagger in Dan. He's not the boasting type, he's not the proud type. He has the humility that you look for, the integrity you look for. And this entirely consistent with your values. Recently, some interesting research. Someone was mentioning Jim Collins back in the back of the room earlier. In his book, Good to Great, he set out some research objectives. He was looking for certain performance criteria that was unique among the successful companies and successful executives. One thing he was not looking for, do you know what it was? We just talked about it in the back of the room. It was a humility. Because, you know, there was a concept years ago that the guy that comes in and, you know, pulls the door off the hinges, the tough guy, is the top executive. We've gone through a lot of generations of leadership, and I'm sure you've had some things you've read about leadership. But Jim Collins found that some of the greatest executives over a period of time, based on their company's performance, were executives that had humility. They gave credit where credit was due. They were humble in terms of the relationships with people. They were great about encouraging customers. And they did all these things as effective leaders. And I thought that was curious that he had not had that as one of his expected criteria. So from a startup that was generating 25 cents a click each time they used the computer to get this information, the company that was now named Passport had a very expensive row to hoe, if you will, because they had to raise enough money to pay for the sales process. It cost, when you fly to Durham, North Carolina to meet with Duke University Hospital and to put them on the system, the plane ticket would, well, maybe with Southwest it's cheaper, but it used to be like a couple of $1,000s flying there and back. And so that eats up at 25 cents per click, that eats up your revenue. And so it took a long time for this business to develop, and lots of money had to be raised. And it would have discouraged a group that didn't have the conviction of what they were trying to do and for the right reasons. So among the mentors I want to mention would be some that have been in my life. I could start with my mom. When I was 4 years old, I went with her to the beauty parlor in a little town, Ballinger, Texas, and I played outside in the sandbox while she went in to get her hair done. And I was having a wonderful time. She finished, she came back out. And as she came back out, I slipped a little red convertible car in my pocket that was in the sandbox. We got home, and she realized that I had this car and said, "Where'd you get this?" And I said, "It was at Miss Ruby's." And she said, "We're going back." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Because you're going to go back and tell her that you took it. It wasn't yours. That's wrong." Sometimes today, with children, we accept things that we should not necessarily accept, not just children. But I mean, it's a lot of trouble for a parent to do what she did. It could have been like, "I'll take it back tomorrow, I'll take it back some other time, or I'll buy it from her." Just brush it over. But she didn't brush it off. She taught me, and that was early in my childhood. I had many jobs. I had a job, paper route when I was 9. I worked in grocery stores. I delivered groceries. I worked in a men's clothing store. In fact, Jay Rogers, who is the head owner of this store, Rogers Menswear, was an example. He said, "You know what? I'd like for you to go with me to the market this year." I said, "Great. When can I go?" "We're going to Dallas in the fall." He said, "We're going to be buying clothes for the spring. So we're going to be going there in sweaters and coats, but we're going to be looking at short sleeves." And so his point was, in every business, you have cycles, you have opportunities for paying a lot of attention to how you go about those. You have knowledge that needs to be understood. In hospitals, you need to know that January is flu season, usually. And in other businesses, any businesses, restaurants, cold weather is not good volume. But so his point was, not only do you dress the way you want people to think the clothes will look on them, but you also want to understand fashions. And so I don't know if fashions is an appropriate context, but it's a business that has legitimacy because it was a great business. Another mentor of mine was my minister, Ted Norton, in this little town, because he made us memorize Scripture. Some of you may have heard recently Terry Waite in the chapel here. Did he tell you about the time that he was, they let him out of his cell just long enough to go to the restroom? There was a gun on the window, and he'd been in solitary confinement all this time and locked up for all this time. He had a chance to break out. You know what he did? He took the gun and gave it to his guard, because he had memorized all of these scriptures all of his life, and he knew, and when he was in a dark cell where he had nothing to read, he went over and over and over, and killing is wrong. So rather than risk doing this violation, he gave the gun up. Another person that I learned from was one of my accounting professors, Overton Faubus in Abilene Christian University. He was a great gentleman with a Stetson LBJ. Are any of you old enough to know what kind of hat LBJ wore? No. Anyway, it wasn't the 6-inch, it wasn't a 4-inch brim, it was just a 2-inch brim. But Dr. Faubus was a wonderful man. Two little lessons. Government can't give you anything that they don't take away from you, which tilted me toward the conservative side politically, because I think that there's so much truth to the fact that we are outspending our resources in this country that I think that was good advice. And it's good advice for a business, obviously. The bank's not going to go along with you very long. He also said, hire honest people and then check on them. Another job I had out of college was a bank examiner. I was an assistant examiner for the Federal Reserve Bank in the 11th District. And sometimes you go in to verify the assets and you count the cash and the cash drawer is short. Sometimes even you have a mom who took some money out to buy some milk for the children. They were going to pay it back. They didn't pay it back. But those little things that we can do that are not right will weaken our resolve when we get to the big things. It's like cheating on your tax returns. There are other examples I should mention. Another mentor for me was a man named Ray E. Brown. He was professor of the health administration program at Duke, where I went for my master's degree. He said, good judgment is the child of wisdom. He talked about judgment a lot. He wrote a book about judgment in administration. One of the qualifications for someone who's in management is to be able to see, maybe beyond the written word. Maybe it teaches you. He felt like pragmatism was vitally important, and being able to see both the trees and the forest at times is necessary as you exercise judgment in an organization. Another inspiration for me was Dr. Thomas Frist, Sr. It's not that Tommy Frist Jr. is not an inspiration, but Tommy Frist Sr. was a physician who went with us in the management company to sell contracts. One time we were in New Hampshire in a little hospital. We were trying to convince them to come with HCA so that we could manage them. And Dr. Frist saw that the administrator was weakened and he couldn't pick up his briefcase. He said, go pick up his briefcase and carry it for him. I didn't think about that. He thought about that. His humility, his caring for people, his understanding of people's needs was an inspiration for his entire life. And he is a wonderful mentor. Even if you can't know him personally, there are books about him. Another person I want you to know about is Edwards Deming. How many of you have heard the name Edwards Deming? Quality improvement is one thing that I became convinced that we needed to do. Dr. Deming went to Japan after the Second World War. How many of you drive Toyotas or Hondas or a Japanese-made car? One hands half the class. Well, guess who helped make their quality what it became? This man taught quality improvement methodology. And they had someone named Ishikawa that taught the Ishikawa fishbone diagram, where you take a diagram and analyze. You know about this? And analyze it. This quality improvement, I don't know if there are courses here. I should know, but it's vitally important to an organization, understanding how to go about improving it. And Deming also had 14 principles that he taught. And one of them you'd be surprised about, because in an automobile assembly line, when someone pulls the cord, it stops the line, and and you're down for whatever period of time it takes to correct a defect. And people were afraid their supervisors would fire them if they pulled the cord. Guess what Dr. Deming had as one of his 14 points? Drive out fear in the organization. Don't have people that are afraid to do the right thing. And that was another very important lesson. So I'm going to quit in a minute. Taking advantage of lifetimes of opportunities. If you have parents, some of us aren't blessed with parents that are as concerned as others, but it doesn't keep you from being that kind of a parent yourself. But the lessons about honesty, the lifetime of integrity, the resistance to temptations when you get out on your own. What do you think? Have any of you read the new book, Flash Boys, by Michael Lewis? If you have an opportunity to Google it and look up the short version of Michael Lewis's book, what it is about is high-frequency trading in the stock market. And I wonder if these guys that developed this felt any conscience, anything wrong with taking advantage of ordinary stock traders in the market by trading milliseconds before anyone else had the price data. They built these intricate systems between market centers, but New Jersey, where the data was originated, Chicago in some cases, where they could get the data and they could milliseconds ahead of others, and huge amounts of trading. But they took advantage of a system, and other people didn't have the same opportunities. I would hope that if you're that bright and able to develop systems like that, and if you're in the stock market trading business, I hope you would never consider something like that personally. Well, let me leave you with one final point that my minister taught me to. I memorized it in the King James, so I'm going to read a different, updated version of it. For I know the plans I have from you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you. And Romans 12:2 says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. And I wish you every success. Thank you.